Here is no water, but only rock, rock and no water, and the sandy road, the road winding above among the mountains, which are mountains of rock without water. If there were water, we should stop and drink. Amongst the rock, one cannot stop or think. So the sense in which the desert is a place of absolute barrenness, of survival. It's a place of survival. So why did God take the Israelites out to the desert, ostensibly make them wander for 40 years in the desert, give them the Torah in the desert? What is the motif of the desert? Why the wilderness? Why this survival modality? And there are two ideas two concepts I want to introduce. Okay. The idea that the wilderness, the Midbar, is a place of trial and tribulation, where the people are tested on their faithfulness with regard to God, with thirst and hunger and not knowing where they're going, right? They have to follow this ancient GPS system, which is called the Ananei Kavod, the clouds of glory. They really don't know where they're going. Right? They're told that they're going to the promised land, but where's that, right? God takes them on the roundabout route, right? So the idea that Midbar, the wilderness, is a place of trial, and the other concept that emerges in Deuteronomy and the prophets, especially Jeremiah and Hosea, is that the wilderness is a place where God takes care of the Israelites. It's a place of divine providence, and God has an intimate and exclusive relationship with the Israelites in the desert. They seem like they seem like antithetical concepts. Is the notion that the wilderness is a place of care and intimacy, is that just looking back at the 40-year sojourn through rosy glasses, through rose-tinted glasses? Is that a kind of nostalgia? Nostalgia is homesickness? Is it a yearning for something that really didn't ever happen? That wasn't really what happened with their relationship. Or was it really a place where God bestowed his beneficence, his or their beneficence on the people of Israel? Okay, so I want to share some sources with you. We're going to pass the sources out. And I also want to plant, in addition to T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, I want to plant an image in your mind. Okay. And the image comes from the Arava, just north of Eilat. My son lives on a kibbutz called Kibbutz Keturah, which is about 20 minutes north of Eilat. And there you look over the area of the Jordan, you see the red hills of the Jordan in the background, and you see this vast expanse of dunes and red hills. And most of what your eye hits when you look at the horizon is the sky. You see the sky. You see the sky in a way you do not see the sky here in Boston or the city. That's what the desert gives you. The wilderness gives you a sense of expanse. Okay. So there's an awareness, a consciousness that emerges through the wilderness. And perhaps, and this is what I'm going to try to get to by the end, the punchlines, right? Perhaps this seeming contradiction between trial and tribulation and God's beneficence, God's care for the people, are not really at odds with each other. Okay, okay, so let's go into the text. So Yeah, but by the way, the reason why that I'm starting with you're probably wondering, well, why are we talking about the Midbar now? Well, Shavuot. Shavuot is where Matan Torah, celebrating the giving of the Torah. And we're going into the book of Midbar, Bamidbar. And I call it Bamidbar rather than Bamidbar because it's Bamidbar Sinai, in the wilderness of Sinai. So that's the book we're about to start in terms of the liturgical reading on the So let's look at the definition of a working definition of Midbar, wilderness or desert. Does somebody want to read the definition which I've taken from the Brown Driver's Brigg Lexicon of the Hebrew Bible? Okay, would you, Dina, would you read that aloud for me?
Where it says number 2, the uninhabited land?
Yeah, the uninhabited.
Okay, can I skip over the Hebrew?
Yes, you can, absolutely.
Wilderness in which no man, Job 38:26, the abode of pelicans, you might like that. Wild asses in Job 24:5.
And jackals, which is in Malachi. Okay, these are all the wild animals that inhabit that.
Ostriches.
In Lamentations, yeah.
Oh, that I had in the wilderness a lodging place of wayfarers, that I might leave my people, from Jeremiah.
Yeah.
And then in a desert land and in a waste howling wilderness, from Deuteronomy.
So that's waste, howling, right? The wasteland, the howling wilderness. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, and that comes from Deuteronomy chapter 32. That's in Ha'azinu, Moses' beautiful swan song. Okay. Now, the first paragraph we talked about was the idea that the desert is a place of trial. Helen, would you like to read those 2 examples that I've given about the idea that it's a place of trial?
Sure thing. Why have you brought us from out of Egypt to bring us to this wretched place? It is no place for grain, or figs, or vines, or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink.
Absolutely.
The people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food.
Okay. So what are they eating for 40 years in the desert?
Manna.
And how are they getting drink? How are they, how are they sustained? There's no water sources there, but maybe an occasional oasis here or there, but there are no real fresh water sources. Where are they getting water from? Anybody know? Dew? Yeah, but I don't think that's enough to drink and sustain yourself with water. How are they getting water?
There is a midrash. Sorry, I just taught this.
Bring it on, bring it on.
There is a midrash that there was a well that just followed Miriam around in the wilderness.
You're right. Yeah. So in chapter 17 of the book of Exodus, Moses hits a rock, opens up a well, and according to Midrash, opens up a source, a water source in the rock, and water pours forth. And apparently that is associated with Miriam's well, and it rolls with them. It's a well, it's a stone that gathers no moss, and it rolls with the Israelites through the desert. Okay. Now, one thing so they're sick of the manna. They're thirsty. In chapter 20, they get thirsty because apparently after Miriam dies, the water dries up. But this idea of thirst and hunger and traipsing around and that's the wilderness. Okay. The book of Numbers, which we're about to start reading, is full of complaint narratives. Chock-a-block, right? We're thirsty. We're hungry. We don't want to go to the promised land. Why don't we go back to Egypt? That's where there are flesh pots. We remember the flesh pots and the lemons and the leeks and the melons. Sorry, the melons. We remember all those wonderful things that we ate for free. Let's go back to Egypt, right? And so this sense in which that the wilderness is a place of no escape, right? There's no distraction. There's no lair house, right? Right? There's nothing to distract you, right? So I want to bring in a quote from Shmaryahu Talmud, who wrote a seminal article about the wilderness, and he describes it this way: the wilderness is a scene of utter cruelty. Beast against beast, man against man. It is perilous to cross the vast tracts of land which are traversable by only a few paths or byways, often barely recognizable. However, due to its remoteness from settled land and its terrifying desolation, the wilderness becomes the chosen refuge of outlaws and fugitives who may prefer an off chance of surviving in exceedingly adverse circumstances to the calamities which are certain to befall them from the hands of their pursuers. So consider Hagar, who runs to the wilderness with her, first initially when she's pregnant, and then later with her son Ishmael. Right? First, because she's fleeing from the punitive hand of her mistress, Sarah, and later because she's banished by Abraham at Sarah's behest. Okay, so there's Hagar. And David, when he's in flight from King Saul for his life, he flees to the wilderness. And Elijah, when he's fleeing from Queen Jezebel. You'll learn all about this in math. Elijah, the prophet, the great prophet Elijah, flees to Horeb, which is another name for Sinai, when he's fleeing from Queen Jezebel, who's persecuting him. Okay, so that's the notion of wilderness as a place of refuge, but also terrible trials and tribulations. Better to survive, better to flee to the wilderness. And that's what Jeremiah wants. Jeremiah wants to flee to the wilderness. That's the quote that you read. Okay. I want to look at a second concept. And the second concept is the idea that wilderness is a place where God took care of the Israelites. And we see that in Deuteronomy chapter 32. And this is the question: why was Torah given in the howling wilderness? And Robert, I'm going to give that quote to you to read from Deuteronomy. Okay, so this is Moses's swan song, his final great speech before he dies, Ha'azinu.
The Edward Fox translation.
Yes, please do.
He found him in a wilderness land, in chaos, a howling desert. He surrounded him. He paid him attention. He guarded him like the pupil of his eye, like an eagle protecting its nest, over its young birds hovering. He spread out his wings. He took him and bore him on his pinions. The Lord alone did lead them, not with him any foreign god.
Right, right. And there was no other foreign god. Okay, so what images emerged from you about the wilderness in this particular text? How is this, suggestive of God's care?
Obviously, the go-to comparison would be the end of Lord of the Rings, where there's the mountain of Mordor, and it's exactly a wilderness land, chaos, howling desert, plus a volcano, and a giant eagle comes over with the wearing out the wings, and of course, John Ronald Reuel told me this, knowing very well the Hebrew Bible. It's not a complete.
So there's carries him off in it. Okay, I don't remember that. That's fantastic.
Of course. The original story, but you just.
That's what I'm saying. That's originally.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll just give you a little piece of trivia. Everett Fox was actually a consultant to the Prince of Egypt when it was made. So who knows if he wasn't also a consultant for that movie.
I just like the fact that.
Well,
you-
He also
Tolkien
helped
knew his
run my
Bible.
English school.
Yeah.
Well,
growing
it's
up.
cadence,
Mm.
it's not, this isn't an English translation. Everett Fox's critics have pointed out that Everett Fox translated the Hebrew into no language. Because there's no English speaker in the world that speaks anything even remotely. Like JPS is an English translation. People speak like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Robert Alter is
Yeah.
English. This is not English.
Mhm.
But that's okay. It's understandable to English.
yes, yes,
The grammar, it's closer to the Hebrew.
yes, yes, that's right,
Things
right,
feel
right, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Ein imo el necha, right? There's no foreign God with him, right? That is the idea, it ends on this punctuation is God is exclusive to the people, right? The idea that the wilderness is not a place of yeshuv, of settlement. There's no competition for God in the wilderness. There's only God, right? And that's where the image of the sky, that your what you see, what you meet is just the massive, the massive expanse of sky. What else? Okay, so the image of the eagle's wings actually comes from the great eagle wings speech in the Exodus before the giving of the Torah, where Moses reiterates God's words. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, how I bore you on eagle's wings. These are the pinions, right? The esa etchem al kanfei nesharim, and brought you to me. So now if you will hearken, yes, hearken to my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be to me a special treasure from among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine. So that's the skula. You will be the chosen people because I've selected you. So this idea that he selects them, takes them out on this, the metaphor of the eagle's wings, and takes them first to a place of absolute barrenness where God has an exclusive relationship with Israel. There's no other God. Okay. What other image emerges for you from this text?
I mean, I give an entirely different image from what you're describing.
Okay. What's the image that
Um,
emerges?
Probably would sound pretty radical, but the people would, the people had to live this life. You know, in other words, there was this accent on God,
Right.
right? But the people were doing the walking in the desert. So it seems to me, I'm not putting down God here.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seems to me that the people had to go through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
however he was speaking, speaking through Moses or he or she, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever the method was.
Yeah. Yeah.
This higher power was not living this
Yes.
life.
Yeah.
Human beings were living this life.
Yeah.
So I see this in a whole different way.
Mhm.
I see this as basically a challenge to see what the people out there end up doing with the conditions they've been given. So I'm staring at this thing from 180 degrees backwards.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? I'm looking at the people who are living this
Yeah.
for 40 years.
Yeah.
And how they come out of it.
Right.
And to me, if God was challenging this, I don't see him as challenging what they could individually handle. It's almost more like, what's the book about? Lord of the Flies or something.
Ah,
Where,
very good.
like, what's this gonna, what is this gonna tell me about these people? Like,
Excellent,
do they
excellent.
kill and maim each other? Do they survive? How do they
Excellent.
rally and how do they survive?
Right. Right.
Okay,
So God sets them up for a trial, which
well, that's how I'm
actually,
staring. That's how I'm staring.
yeah, yeah. It sets them up for a trial, which in fact, the first generation fails, right? They were only supposed to be in the desert after the giving of the Torah for a few months. It would have been a few months from once they got the Torah to traveling and entering into the land of Canaan. But what happened? All those series of complaint narratives culminate in the venture of the spies that go into the land of Canaan, to explore it, and then come back and give an evil report. And all the people mutiny, that right? Mutiny on the boundary. They all rebel against Moses and the whole project of entering the promised land. And God says, okay, everybody out of the pool. Meaning you're not going into the land. And they're sentenced to wander for another 39 years, essentially. Right? 40 years comparable to the 40 days that the spies explored the land. Okay, so that from the
Well, see,
perspective
to me,
of
that's
trial.
Forcing my point.
Yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
plan that.
No, but
Like playing.
yeah, so there's this sense in which
Passivity, like they're looking, for God to help them. And I think the message was, don't look here, like 24/7. I'll show up when I want to show up.
beautiful, beautiful. So you're seeing it as a kind of a transition period, right?
So for me, their passivity ultimately is why they fail.
Yeah,
That was the first, I'm
beautiful,
not a
beautiful.
biblical scholar by
Yeah,
any means.
yeah, yeah.
okay? But that's how I've seen it.
Yeah, it's like the adolescents. Is anybody parents? How many of you are adolescents have gone through parenting adolescents? Okay, I don't know if I want to say a blessing or right. Right. So it's a period of foment, right? They're in transition from this childhood total dependence or potential dependence on their parents to a period of individuation. And sometimes it results in, okay, you guys have a lot more growing up to do before you're ready to go into the world. Yeah. Alex.
A little earlier in that parenting process,
Mhm.
I was hanging out with my friend's baby on the spot, feeding him Cheerios, and then he dropped a Cheerio, and very, very upset. But then he actually was swaddled, like one of those, whatever the thing that people wear. I don't know what the word is. It's swaddled, the front one. But just like the verbs that surrounded him, gave him attention,
Yeah.
guarded him like people of his eyes. Sound very like caring for a baby, even more so. Maybe
Yeah.
later they get annoying and teenagery. But the protection sounds very much like being
Beautiful, beautiful, right.
hug.
Yeah, beautiful. Surrounded him. So that's the Yesovenhu, Yevavanenhu, Vitzreinu, right? That's paid him attention, guarded him. That's swaddling. So that surround sound and feel of God. And that's a very different image than the why have you abandoned me, right? God is very present in the desert in a way that they would not have been conscious of God's presence in the city, or certainly not in Egypt during the enslavement. So they become aware of God's presence in the desert in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be. Now they're very testy with that presence, right? Is God in our midst or not? They say suspiciously in chapter 17 of Exodus, right? Is God in our midst or not? Oh, I'll show you. Along comes Amalek and attacks you, and God helps you win the war. God is present. Okay. So there's this sense, right? This sense of always testing, is God here or not here? But God, yes, at least according to Moses, God is there. Now let's look at another text. And then we're gonna dabble in Midrash. Okay. The other text that's very striking is of a very favorable depiction of the desert sojourn is Jeremiah. And it's actually a very famous song, but I'm not going to sing it because I get embarrassed singing. So, Jeremiah 2, would you, Barry, would you read that text? And fine to do it in English.
The word of God came to me saying, go proclaim to Jerusalem, thus says God. I enacted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride. How you followed me in the desert, in the land not sown, They never ask themselves, where Aya is God? Who brought us from the land of Egypt? Who led us through the wilderness? A land of deserts and pits, a land of drought and darkness, a land nobody has traversed, where no human being has dwelt. And you, O generation, behold the word of the Lord. Have I been a wilderness to Israel, or a land of thick darkness? Why then do my people say, we are free, we will come to you no more?
Okay. Questions that, we don't have the whole chapter in front of you, but how is the desert being remembered here? And why in this context in Jerusalem? Remember, he's addressing, this is on the eve of the Babylonian invasion. Jerusalem is about to be destroyed, and the Israelites have been committing all sorts of sins, especially idolatry. Okay, so why do you think the wilderness is being invoked here as a, yeah, as a kind of honeymoon period? Why and what about the wilderness is striking?
Almost like God was the Deus ex machina type thing. Yeah, literally. But,
Yes.
yeah, it's like, I don't know, if there's, yeah, it's harking back of, is there gonna be someone who's gonna save us, like way back when?
Yeah. And yeah, God saved us back then, right? God, right in the howling wilderness, there was God to save us. Yeah, good. Anybody else? What's striking about this? What are the synonyms for desert that come up?
It's
Right, a land of deserts and pits.
Darkness.
Yeah, darkness. A land not sown. What is a land not sown for you? Barren, yeah. There's no agricultural land, there's no civilization. Nothing can be planted in this land, right? Nothing can be settled in this land. What else? What question does Jeremiah say they did not ask? Which is a really striking question, right? What did they not ask in the desert? Which is not quite true, but this is how Jeremiah is figuring it. What did they not ask? Yeah, they didn't ask, where is God? Because God was there. God was right there. Now, the word aye is really striking. It's the very first question that's posed in the Bible. It's when Adam is hiding after eating the tree from the tree of knowledge, and God says, Yeka, where are you? Meaning, where are you existentially? Don't think you can hide from me, right? It's a rhetorical question. And similarly, God says to Cain after he slays his brother, Hey, Hevel Achicha, where is Abel, your brother? But they never asked the question, where is God? Because it was obvious to them where was God. Now, how does God manifest to the Israelites in the desert? Anybody have a clue? How did they know God was present?
Wasn't it the towering cloud that was slowing the cloud?
A pillar of cloud. That's the pillar of cloud. So the pillar was present. That was the kavod Adonai. That was the glory of God appeared in a cloud. How else did they know that God was present?
food that they were given.
Yeah, the manna that came to them every day from the skies. It's called lechem min hashamayim, bread from the skies, right? And it came with the dew in the morning. And the well that we spoke about, right? That well, that wandering well. So there was a sense in which God was present as a provider for them, water, food, shelter, right? Shade, guidance, where to go, right? God was very, very present. Therefore, they didn't ask the question, Aye, where is God? Now, why do you think Jeremiah is invoking the memory of the wilderness in this way at this point in history? Yeah.
Seems a little less obvious what he's got now. Like things are looking very bleak.
Right. And they are asking the question, where is God? Okay, good, good. Yeah, yeah. What else might be operating?
Well, I mean, it says right here, people are saying we're free, we're not, you know, we're not necessarily following you.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's right, you know.
yeah.
right.
Who are they dancing with these days, right? Who are they dancing with? Who are they? Oh, that drink looks really good. I don't know if I want to, right? Or, right?
Yeah,
There,
we have some options here.
we have options. Exactly. We have Baal, we have the Astarte, we have the Ashtoret, we have lots of other kinds of gods here. There's a temple to Dagon, right? All sorts of possibilities, right? So no longer is God exclusive, right? If you go back to that quote from Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy and Jeremiah are very deeply connected, where it says, Ein imo el nechar, right? There was not with him any foreign god in the wilderness. But here, okay. The other thing I want to think about, and here, I want to think about marriage. And often we think back to the first years of our marriage, that original state of honey, about that original love, right? You followed after me as a bride in the devotion of your youth. That's the image that Jeremiah is evoking. Who is the bride here? That followed after the groom? Yeah, Israel is the bride. Israel is the bride following after God. And there's this sense in which, and the Torah, of course, is the marriage contract, right? That's the ketubah. And Jeremiah is invoking that original ideal of the honeymoon period, that love, that original love that they had, in order to awaken it up again. We're still beholden, we're still in relationship with each other, even though you've done all this, you're distracted, right?
Years have gone by.
Yeah, well, it's probably about
Right?
400,
40 years have gone by.
400 years, right? If we're talking about Jeremiah, a long time. They've been married a long time.
I don't know if I think you knew any of that stuff literally.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. So,
Yeah,
But a lot of
yeah,
time's gone.
yeah, yeah.
And a couple of folks were using like parental
Yeah,
types
yeah.
of analogies. If you were a kid, you're not a kid anymore. You know, I mean, it's, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
everyone's older.
So why do we remember those original days of that love period? Now, the way we actually experience that first year of marriage, I don't know if they're actually the hardest period in a marriage, because there's a lot of getting used to, there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of working through stuff. But when you remember it, this is what I think Jeremiah is doing. He's remembering it as a period of deep love and commitment. But when there was intimacy, and that was what the wilderness was. I want to take it to the Midrash. And the Midrash is from Bamidbar Rabbah. There's a parallel in the Tanchuma. It's a mechilta. It's a what we call a petichta. So it opens with the opening verse of the Torah reading, which is called the lectionary verse, which is Bamidbar Sinai, Vayomer Adonai Bamidbar Sinai. And then it winds it, Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Bamidbar Sinai, and then it refers to this verse from Jeremiah. Was I a desert to you? Right? Was I a wilderness to you? Okay, so let's look at this. And I think they take the question very seriously, right? In what way was God not a wilderness? And perhaps pushing up against God not being a wilderness, yet there was an experience of wilderness. Okay, and working with the both of that. Okay, would you like to read?
Sure.
Okay, the English is fine. Yeah, from Bimbi.
Another interpretation. Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. This text is related to, and near a generation, behold the word of the Lord. Have I been a wilderness to Israel, or a land of thick darkness? The Holy One said to Israel, because you said to Moses, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water. Have I been a wilderness to Israel? Did I act like a wilderness to you? In the ways of the world, would a king of flesh and blood, when he leaves for the desert, find it comfortable to live there as he had in the palace? Neither food or drink as he found in the palace. Yet when you were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and when I brought you out from there, how had you lied down on the ocean? So God led the people by way of the wilderness at the sea of Reed. What is led them round about? I made you lie, recline in the way of truth, lying in your bed.
Okay, let's just pause there. Okay, that's a lot. Okay. Okay. So how is the Midrash answering the question, have I been a wilderness to you? Like in Jeremiah, it's a rhetorical question. And I always say behind every rhetorical question, there's a real question. So how is it being answered?
I'm not sure if Jeremiah's quest or point, because God wasn't a wilderness, but he made them stay in the wilderness.
Nice.
So I'm not sure if Jeremiah asking rhetorically, is he expecting to say, oh no, God wasn't like the wilderness? Or is he trying to get them to say, yeah, I guess in some way God was? I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
what Jeremiah is trying to get them to feel.
Excellent. Excellent. I think there's an edge there. And I think you're picking up on it, Robert.
Right. I think.
Absolutely. An axe to grind and an edge to sharpen and all that stuff. Right? So I think he's saying both. I think he's saying God placed you in the wilderness, but God was not the wilderness, right? And don't mistake the wilderness for God. Right? That's the place of God. But it's but God is the whole world, right? I think there's an expression, maybe Alex, you remember this expression, you can help me out. That God is the makom, but God is not just makom. God is place, but God is beyond place. And I think that's the edge that he's trying to get to. Now, the Midrash brings in the questions that we talked about we quoted this from Numbers chapter 20 and chapter 21, where the people said, asked a real question. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no food or water. And God answers, was I a wilderness to you? Well, you brought us to die in the desert, right? There's real anxiety there. And then they bring in a mashal, a parable, and they say, this is like a king. And always a king is God, right? This is like a king that right, normally, actually, here, in contrast to a king of flesh and blood, a king of flesh and blood doesn't expect to go out to the desert and find the same comforts that he had in the palace. You, on the other hand, I, God, who is the King of kings and not a king of flesh and blood, have provided you with much more than a king of flesh and blood who finds himself in the desert. I did provide you with beautiful clouds of glory to lie down on in comfort. And I provided you with fresh spring water from the Miriam's well, and I provided you with shade and manna, bread from heaven that could taste like anything. Okay. So the next part of the Midrash was, I raised up 3 teachers for you. As it says, I sent Moses and Aaron and Miriam before you, quoting from Micha. Through the merit of Moses, you ate manna, of food which the holy ancestors had not known, as it says, and then God gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your fathers had ever known. And through the merit of Aaron, I surrounded you in clouds of glory, as it says, he spread a cloud for cover and a fire to give light at night. Okay, so it's shade and warmth. And the desert gets very, very cold at night. And then it describes all the manifestations of the cloud, that there were 7 clouds, and there were 5 clouds, and there were 4 different directions, and there was a cloud above and a cloud below. So they were walking on clouds all the time, right? And it protected them from snakes and scorpions. And it leveled the mountains, and it raised up the valleys. Okay. And the well came through the merit of Miriam, who uttered a song over the waters, and Miriam sang for them, sing to Adonai, and at the waters of Be'er, the Israelites would sing, oh well, rise up. So Miriam brings song to the desert. Miriam elicits water from the well through song, and the Israelites then chant that song when they want to bring the water forth from the well. Aaron is associated with the clouds of glory, and Moses is associated with the bread from heaven, with the manna. Okay, so God was providential in that desert period. God provided for the Israelites. He provided 3 model leaders, Moses and Aaron and Miriam, and provided them with food and water and shade and warmth, and even killed all the scorpions and snakes. So they were cared for. Right. And the idea that that was the transitional period. That was the time where they were coddled, where they became conscious of God's presence, ever abiding presence for them. And that's where the marriage contract, the Torah, was sealed and given over to them. And we will remember that wilderness period, right? We can remember that wilderness period as something to which we are beholden to God as having cared for us, and even as we come into a world full of distraction and absence of God, seeming absence of God, there's still the wilderness figures as a period where our original relationship with God was forged. And here I want to stop and open it up for questions, or turn it over to Terry.
Well, we can start with questions, but thank you for your teaching. That was great.
Question, I think the word coddle was close,
Swaddled. I like the swaddle image that we had from,
mean,
yeah.
They were provided with enough to survive,
Yeah.
but nothing more.
Yeah.
The one coddle.
Yeah.
Word.
Because I think there's a kind of a dependency that was actually fostered, right? For example, the manna, they weren't allowed to accumulate the manna. They couldn't store it. They couldn't leave it over. And God would provide, right, just the right amount.
But they were coddled because there was no other option. It wasn't.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's
But
not-
it coddled in the sense of fostering a dependency very, stringent.
That's not being coddled.
That's not being
You're being controlled in a way that makes you very dependent on a force outside yourself. I don't see how that's.
Yeah.
That's just keeping you a child.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And certainly, I think they chafed at that
I'm not
too.
gonna- I'm
Yeah.
not like
Yeah, no, I think there's a different way of saying, so what word would you say instead of
I don't
coddle?
know, I have to think. The second I saw that word.
Coddled is a nice word, yeah. Coddled is a nice
Yeah, I
word.
know it was 21st century. you know,
Yeah, yeah.
But, to be given the minimum.
Yeah.
To survive.
Maybe,
God,
maybe helicopter, God was a helicopter parent.
Well, that to me would be a more honest description.
Yeah.
I just keep focusing on the people,
Yeah,
because really, I think they were given the minimum.
Yeah.
The absolute minimum. To survive every day. And what they have besides, bread and water, whatever you want to call it. Even if the mama tasted phenomenal, 40 years of it.
yeah, yeah.
Like you could love chocolate.
Do you guys Willy Wonka? Do you know Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? You know how the chocolate could taste, or the chewing gum could taste like anything? That was, according to Midrash, that was the mana.
That's what I was just saying about.
Yeah,
chocolate.
yeah,
Chocolate,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not that day, it's-
Anybody else have a response to this teaching? Irk you, provoke you, inspire you? Yeah.
Well, I always think of Shavuot as being the lost Chag, because it's in the summer.
Yeah,
And many times, so the kids, especially school has ended, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, when you go into Shavuot, you have to prepare yourself in some way. And I think this is a good preparation. It
Yeah.
really leads me into a different view of what was going on.
Mhm.
So I think that would be very helpful.
It's like, here's a blank canvas. What are you all gonna do with it? I'm giving you enough to just, breathe every day, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And really, the biggest thing they were getting were each other.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just keep going back to the people who had to live it.
Yeah,
And, that's just my take on it.
Barry, you're smiling. What's behind the
I
smile?
don't know, just listening.
Yeah.
I kind of think the wilderness in a funny way, it's kind of everybody says that a blank slate, it's like, it's actually opportunity as opposed to not opportunity.
Yeah.
It's hard out there, but it's kind of yours to make it what you want to make out of it.
Yeah. And in that way, it's a testing ground.
Yeah.
Because it's a blank slate.
It
Yeah,
still is.
yeah.
God's certainly been consistent.
Yeah. What's that? A horse with no name. Do you remember that song? About
I think it was the one by Dan America.
yeah,
Through the desert on a horse with no name.
yeah. I think about that song as the sense of loneliness, right? And destitution that he felt. And
I think it also has lyrics.
yeah,
Remember?
sure.
Do you remember?
Been to the
There
desert.
was lyrics
I think we only know the first line.